Okay, good evening. Welcome to our community members and panelists who are joining our virtual town hall this evening. We are looking forward to sharing some information and answering your questions so you can make an informed decision as you prepare to vote on the bond referendum on November 8th. Our panelists all have expertise on different aspects of the referendum, from the various benefits for students to the strategy for funding. They are here to share what they know, and they will answer your questions throughout the town hall this evening. Please send your questions through the email address clearviewvote@clearviewregional.edu. Taking questions this way allows us to keep our town hall on schedule and organized into segments. Your question will be directed to the panelist who can best answer it. If possible, please email your question before or during the topic that your question applies to. We will also have an open period, question period at the end of the town hall. If we do not get to your question, we will follow up with a response by email. This forum was designed for your convenience, so you can tune in for the topics that interest you the most. A recording of this town hall discussion will be available later this week on the district's YouTube channel and the bond referendum website, which is clearviewregional.edu/future. That website also includes frequently asked questions, voting information, and much more. I think you'll find the information to be informative. This referendum is an opportunity for our district to complete approximately $59 million in projects with no increase to the overall tax rate. If voters approve, Clearview Regional will receive over $23 million in state aid towards these improvements. Now, taxpayers from across the state pay into this fund for school upgrades. The money only comes back home to districts with an approved referendum. You'll hear more about the financial details later in this program. We'll start off by covering the projects that would modernize our buildings. Two people who know our school buildings very well are the district's architect, George Duthie of Faraday Weiss, Hopkins and Duthie, Architects and Planners, and Steve Nicolella, our Director of Facilities. George and Steve, can you begin by telling us how these projects, especially climate control, will make a dramatic difference for Clearview students and staff? George,
sure, John.
Can you start the discussion, please?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, John. I'm happy to. Everyone, I'm George Duthie from Freytech Weiss Hopkins Duthie. Fortunate enough to work with the Clearview Regional School District for many, many years. Thanks, John. And I'm going to start with an overview of the projects, which many of you have heard before if you've been to some of the presentations. And I think the name of the categories of these projects probably says it all in terms of how it will benefit the entire school community, students, teachers, and staff. Indoor environmental quality, life safety and security, category number 2, building integrity, category 3, and educational program needs, right? So those are the 4 main groupings of projects. We're going to talk about indoor environmental quality shortly, but I'd like to talk about some of the other categories first and what they include. So life safety and security projects, they include things like replacement of emergency generators, fire alarm systems, which are beyond their useful life right now and don't meet modern code requirements, although they're still functional, of course. Interior door replacement, that includes security enhancements within that project for the doors, intruder lock sets, security glazing, things of that nature. Vehicle and pedestrian traffic safety improvements will be made on both campuses for the middle school and the high school. And there will be communications systems upgrades as well to aid in getting the word out to the school community in the event of an emergency. What are the building integrity projects? Well, those are the things that keep the building weather tight, right? So we have roofing at the middle school for the remainder of the roof areas at the middle school that are no longer under warranty. We have replacement of exterior doors at both schools, and that will include some security features as well. There are some windows to replace still at the middle school and the high school. We're going to get those as well when we do the project. So those are the main building integrity projects. Educational projects, we've got several of those at the middle school, as many of you know, converting the wood shop to a STEM lab. That's one of the projects. Educationally, at the high school, we have plans to, many of you have heard, upgrade the auditorium lighting, sound, and video systems, modernize those systems, and make them more conducive to a modern performing arts venue. We're going to be doing renovations in the trainer's room, in the existing weight and conditioning room, and also in the auxiliary gym, where we can expand that gym programming so that we can use it for more multi-athletic type functions, as well as wrestling practice, which will benefit the entire community. So those are the main educational projects. Now, as I stated earlier, indoor air quality, that's really the biggest part of this question. This referendum is very, very important. Both buildings, particularly the high school, have both temperature and humidity control problems and have had that for quite some time. It's due to older equipment that's no longer functioning optimally. It's beyond its useful life. It's also more severe weather conditions, which equipment 20 years ago was not designed to really anticipate. And there's been equipment failures because of the unavailability of parts. We all know about the supply chain shortages, and in many cases, that equipment just is not supported for service anymore. So I think we need to talk about what we've accomplished so far in terms of pilot program. So over a couple of summers, and this was several years ago, we did projects to tackle the humidity issues at the high school. It dealt with the HVAC controls, it dealt with insulation of pipes, and we did a proof of concept for the upcoming work that's planned in the referendum. What was the result? Well, we achieved much better temperature control and humidity control, as well as energy efficiency in those rooms that we did at the high school. So these projects were, just for those few rooms, quite costly, impossible to do the entire building without support of the dollars. And also, of course, the state's contribution towards those projects in the remainder of the high school rooms. And what else are we doing at the high school? Very important project, air conditioning all of the gyms. Now, these projects are all interrelated, including air conditioning in the gyms, because what happens on a hot summer day, you leave those doors open, well, guess where the cool air from the rest of the rooms go? It goes into the gymnasium. So, because there's such large volume spaces. So by air conditioning those gyms, it's going to help to even out the temperature and humidity throughout the entire building. It's going to increase greatly the comfort level for all of the occupants of the building. Okay. So very important, and the most perhaps important part of the referendum projects.
Well, thanks, George. I mean, you pretty much hit everything in a nutshell. Our systems are old. A lot of the units are obsolete, and we can't get parts for any of the equipment. Lead times on the parts that are available are far out. You talked about the gyms. We have large fans in the gyms for the spring and the early fall. That the temperature swings from kids coming out of air conditioned classrooms, and then they're going into the gyms, and the gyms can get upwards of 80 degrees. So by air conditioning gyms, we'll be able to control the humidity. They'll control the climate within those gyms to give the students and staff a temperature controlled building. As for the humidity, like George said, we did a pilot program with new controls in some of the classrooms. And those new controls actually control the humidity in the classrooms, which, again, we had those issues with humidity problems within the building. That's pretty much what I have, George.
So on a parallel path, I just wanted to mention, everyone's probably heard about the Energy Savings Improvement Program, ESIP. And this is a project that's kind of on a parallel path with the referendum. They're kind of both interdependent on one another. So one without the other really won't be possible. But what is this? What is an ESIP program? Well, what an ESIP program is, you use energy efficiency projects that save energy conservation measures, they're called, to help pay for HVAC upgrades. Okay, so what you do is you take the savings of gas and electric and maintenance, and the incentives that come along with that, because the state offers incentives as well. And you put all of that money into funding the improvements over a period of time. In this case, it'll be 10 years for Clearview. There will be a solar aspect for that will have a longer period of time, 15 years. But those projects work hand in glove with one another. Some of the projects in the referendum for structural and roofing and things like that are going to support those strictly energy saving projects, which are going to be bundled into the energy savings improvement program. Not just HVAC controls, but also lighting upgrades, boiler and chiller replacements. As I said earlier, solar and other energy efficiency measures are going to be built into this ESIP. So that's on a parallel path with the referendum. And again, these projects are no cost to the district. The referendum is going to include the items to support the ESIP. And, together, we're going to achieve greater comfort for the occupants of the school, and also great energy efficiencies, reduced maintenance costs, and reduced long-term costs as well. Thank you.
George and Steve, thank you. We do have a couple of questions for both of you. The first, George, I'm going to ask you to jump in and take this one.
Sure.
Would the new equipment improve the air filtration that the buildings currently have?
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. There'll be a great improvement in ventilation, air quality, higher levels of filtration than what we were seeing in equipment that was 20 years old. MERV 13 filtration, for example, will be pretty much commonplace now. But we may put some additional air treatment in the form of bioionization. It's called bipolar ionization, needle ionization, which is a way of using ultraviolet light and plasma to purify the air. We're also looking at temperature, humidity, and energy efficiency improvements across the board, as well as the improved filtration.
Okay, thank you, George. There's actually another question we received earlier. Why can't the district just repair the existing equipment?
So I'll answer that question.
Yeah,
you're taking good money and putting it towards old equipment. So basically what you're doing is if you have a car with, say, a car with 200,000 miles on it, and you're going to put money into that car is old, outdated, and it's going to eventually keep on breaking down. And that's what we have with equipment. Our equipment is older. I mean, it's past its useful life. So we're putting good money that we could put to use for other projects within the district in the repairing equipment that we constantly breaks down, because an exhaust fan on a roof might run 18 hours a day. Well, you figure that motor's running 18 hours a day for 25 years. I mean, it eventually is going to break down, and then it's in the long run you want to replace the equipment, upgrade to the newer technology, gives you better air purification, like George said, better efficiency of the equipment, and with the new technology and the new controls, better control of humidity within the buildings on a climate control side of it.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Are there any other questions in regards to the HVAC and the climate controls? I haven't seen anything else come through yet. Okay, if you happen to have a question in the future, we can either try to address it at the end of tonight's segment, or we'll put it into the frequently asked questions if it's emailed to us. The FAQ is on our website. Okay, so thank you, George and Steve. It is good to hear about some of the big projects we could get accomplished through the referendum and the energy savings program funds. Fortunately, the timing has worked out for us so that we're able to do that without raising the tax rate. I'd like to take a moment to remind everyone how to ask questions to our panelists tonight. Again, I'm sorry to be redundant, but for some folks that just joined us, please send your question to clearviewvote@clearviewregional.edu. We want to make sure we want to make the most of having our experts here tonight to answer everything you want to know about the referendum. So we have several interesting segments coming up. If you see a topic that interests you, send your question in now if possible, and we'll try to ask it during that specific segment. And again, there will be time for more questions at the end of the town hall discussion this evening. We continuously seek ways to improve our buildings, and we, I believe, have been particularly diligent about security overall. The referendum would fund upgrades to some of the latest security technology to make our schools even safer. Our high school principal, Keith Brook, will join our facilities director, Steve Nicolella, and architect George Duthie to talk about security. Mr. Brook, can you initiate the discussion regarding security, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Horchak. Well, as always, the safety and security of our schools is our highest priority. And here at the school level, our students are very much aware of the need to, have a secure building. So we want to do everything we can to make the students feel confident and safe in their learning environment. We want to help them focus on learning and not have those other distractions. So the district recently upgraded the public address system. The system integrates with our new emergency lockdown notification system, or LENS system, and can send threat alert messaging. So proposed additions to the PA system include replacing speakers in the classrooms and also our common areas, but also adding some digital messaging boards as well.
So I want to talk a little bit about the exterior doors. The exterior doors in our district, a lot of the frames are starting to rust out. Over the years, the doors get constantly used. The door closures are getting worn out. The locks are getting worn out. Not to say that the building's secure. The building's secure, but again, a lot of these doors are past their useful life. They need to be replaced and upgraded. New door closures so they properly close correctly, and we're not constantly repairing them. On average, we're probably repairing 2 to 3 doors a week with the age of them.
Yeah. So, as I can add on to what Steve is saying. So one of the things we see is, hardware doesn't last forever. Some of these doors are well in excess of 20 years old. Hardware is subject to a lot of wear and tear, as you might imagine, in a school. And also there are better technologies available today for securing our schools. So the exterior doors actually give me a very important part of the security of the building. As you can well imagine, it's the first point of entry, right? So we're going to, not only we're going to replace the doors and the hardware with a more robust exit hardware, we're going to also place security glazing or film on all of the exterior doors as well. And we're going to provide door monitoring functions. So the district will be able to tell through its security system right away if a door has been left open, or propped open by anyone. So those are going to be things that are going to be added to these doors. And there's going to be a somewhat more robust locking mechanism also incorporated into the exterior doors. And along with that are the interior door replacements. I think it's important to note that in today's environment, classroom doors are obviously also a very strong deterrent against unauthorized entry into classrooms. So what does that mean? It means classroom doors equipped with thumb bolt intruder locks that can have visual indicators, so you can immediately tell if that door is open or locked, with a red and green simple flag in the door. Very simple action for a teacher to understand in the event of emergency, not having to fumble with a key, but just grab a thumb turn and turn it until you see that red. What else is going to be on that door? We're going to have what's called attack resistant glass in all of the classroom doors. That will deter somebody with ill intent from getting into the classrooms and buy time. That's what we're trying to do, right? Get time for those first responders to get to the school. So that's just related to the doors. That's the security aspects of the project. But we have other things going on with security as well. Fire alarm with voice evacuation is an enhanced way to exit the building in the event of a fire drill or a real actual fire emergency. We will have the emergency generators that are being installed are going to be connected to critical parts of the building's technology infrastructure that controls security systems. Okay, so things like select telephones for emergencies and communication systems will stay up and running in the event that there is a power failure. Okay, traffic safety is another one. So we'll be doing a traffic study we have some ideas about how to improve the separation of pedestrians, vehicles, cars, private vehicles, and staff vehicles, and buses within both campuses, and to interconnect those campuses to improve efficiencies. So we'll begin with a traffic study that will be undertaken after the referendum passes. And we do think that that will also result in measurable safety improvements at both schools.
I think a lot of parents out there may have recognized our efforts over the last several years to try and make our parking lots as safe as we possibly can. We start off the year with approximately almost 300 senior drivers, new drivers, albeit, and then throughout the year, juniors. So by the end of the school year, we've got approximately 500 drivers, in addition to parents dropping off, staff coming in, 175 staff maybe at the high school alone. So it's a tremendous amount of stress on our parking lots, infrastructure. So recently we moved buses around back, and we have at the high school sort of essentially created two different loops on the Cedar Road side and Breakneck Road side. So I look forward to, the information that we can learn from traffic studies to create an even safer, entrance and dismissal, for our families, for student drivers, but also, parents dropping off, picking up, and everyone else descending upon the campus.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate that info. Anybody who's in our lots from 7:15 to 7:30 in the morning know exactly what George and Keith just mentioned. It's a very busy time on campus each morning. We do have some questions regarding security for our panelists. I'm actually going to ask Mrs. Pennell, our school business administrator, to jump in on this first one. Esther, you're obviously directly involved in the bidding of any projects and oftentimes the implementation, the actual work in the field. So I'll ask you to take this. What other security improvements have been made?
Okay, sure, John, thanks. Several years ago, we installed secure vestibules in the entrances of both schools with sliding windows to pass through lunches and other things. So we don't actually need to open the doors and let people in when it's not necessary. We also installed 3M safety and security film on both vestibules. We have stationed greeters at the entrances with call systems to talk to the visitors who are outside. We've installed lobby guard systems in both schools, which we use to do background checks on our visitors. We have SROs in both of our schools now. Between 2019 and 2021, we upgraded several of our systems, including the surveillance system. We put a new Avigilon camera system in. We upgraded our telephone system. We upgraded our access control system, which is the door locks. And finally, we upgraded the paging system. Our paging system now talks to the new telephone system, and the paging system is interconnected between the buildings. So we can lock down in both buildings at the same time, and the buildings talk to each other, if you will. We have the ability to dial in to any classroom on the paging system and actually listen in the event of an emergency. The local police are able to do that from outside the room. In 2021, we installed the Lens 3 system, which is the lockdown emergency notification system that Mr. Brook mentioned. This works like a fire alarm system. Anyone can push the button and activate a lockdown. There are lockdown buttons throughout the school buildings. After the button is pushed, an automated message is played on the paging system. The strobe lights are turned on outside the building. You'll see them lights. If they're on, that may mean we're locked down, we're shelter in place, or we're testing. The access control system is notified and responds accordingly. For example, the doors are locked down. And finally, a call is placed to the local police station. That all happens automatically. So we're still looking to add enhancements to the Lens system. The referendum includes new exterior doors. Once the doors are in place, we plan to add door alarms in the future. That's not part of the referendum. And we're also looking to enhance the surveillance system so that the cameras would actually be able to capture a picture of anyone entering from the outside doors.
That's
Thank you.
great.
Thank you, Esther. I just wanted to mention one other thing. It's not really something specific to the referendum. However, I think it's important for our community to know. We obviously have a very strong relationship with both of our local police departments. And specifically because we're geographically located within the parameters of Harrison Township, they actually have access to all of our security cameras from the police department, from their individual desk units, and now even from the mobile devices. So it's nice for them to be able to respond and have access to that information in real time. So just an aside in regards to something that's important in regards to security. Next question, maybe George, you could jump in. So how would this new equipment reduce the risk of someone getting into the building?
Yes, that's a great question, John. And it's all about hardening the target, right? It's all about make it more and more difficult for someone to get in, and it doesn't make it impossible for someone to get in, because if someone wants to get in, they're going to get in, and that's just the truth of the matter. But it'll make it very, very difficult for someone to breach an exterior door or to breach a classroom door, and it's always important, just close that time gap between the breach and the attempted breach and the response by law enforcement, and that's all we're trying to do. What would the equipment be? Again, it's that security glazing. It's just that the exterior door is equipped with the more robust hardware, the classroom doors with the more robust hardware. I think another thing that's important, and we didn't really touch upon, is to just mention with the sound system improvements that are planned as part of the referendum. A big part of that will be to put speakers in more places in the building. Back in the day, we put a few speakers in the classroom and a few speakers in the hallway, but we didn't have speakers in stair towers and bathrooms and places like that. So when we install the new sound system in the school and expand upon what's already been put in place, speakers will be put in many more locations, and you have them right now, greatly increasing that audibility throughout both schools.
Okay, thank you, George, and the other panelists. We're actually doing relatively well on time. We're just a touch early. Obviously, our segment times were estimates based upon what we thought were going to be anticipated, number of questions. In regards to security, it is good to know that we're able to use technology and leverage that in order to make our schools even safer. So we'll move to the next segment, which will focus on improvements that directly impact the student's academic experience. Our high school and our middle school students already have STEM, but more so the room dedicated at the high school level. And STEM is, for those many folks know, but the acronym is science, technology, engineering, and math. We are planning a similar STEM lab at the middle school, which is part of the referendum. Also, anyone who's ever been to a musical or concert at Clearview Regional knows that we have a terrific performing arts program. However, the auditorium light and sound systems are past due for replacement. So this evening, we have two staff members on our panel. They'll be able to explain how these instructional areas will benefit our students. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tom Guida, who's a STEM teacher at the middle school. And then I'll ask Mr. Jerry Deloach, a longtime middle school and high school music teacher, to jump in at that point. Mr. Guida?
Hello, everybody. I want to start by saying that STEM activities are a great way to keep students engaged and build critical thinking skills. Students in the middle school have interest but no dedicated STEM space. STEM projects require a lot of space to work as well as storage. The students often work on them over the course of several days, and we don't want to make the students break everything down every single day. The classroom that we are looking at using for the new STEM lab is the old wood shop, and will be a great space for our new STEM lab. Having access to STEM in the middle school could spur interest in science-based clubs like robotics. Better prepared students for opportunities and instructions they'll have in the high school STEM lab, which we currently bring a lot of students over for a club a couple days of the week, but it'd be even better if we had that type of space at the middle school.
Thank you, Tom. Certainly gives us a perspective on STEM and how it could benefit our middle school students. As the past decade has proven, Science and technology are certainly good investments. And these areas continue to be a growing part of future careers. Of course, let me switch over to performing arts. Anyone who knows Clearview knows that we've developed well-rounded students over the years. The arts are an extremely important part to the well-rounded student at Clearview. And ask Mr. Jerry Deloach, who has contributed to student success for many years, to talk more about VPA.
Thank you so much, John. I could brag on our students for the next 5 hours or more. In the time that I've been here, there really is no program in South Jersey comparable to what Clearview has. And it's really due to the support of the administration and the work of the students. We've been voted for the last 5 years as a best community for music education by the NAM Association. That's the National Association for Music Merchants. That places us in the top 4% of all high schools in the United States for music education, which is really an incredible honor. We've had choirs sing at Carnegie Hall. Our bands are consistently ranked within the top of the state. And last year we had 2 of our concert bands were ranked in the top 12 bands in the state of New Jersey. One high school, Clearview, had 2 bands in the top 12. Just incredible. The musical has won awards at Paper Mill Playhouse, Rising Star Awards, and was up for Best Musical last year. So needless to say, we have some incredible students involved in the arts, and their work is really second to none. All that to say, the auditorium where they do perform in is 17 years old. And as I was saying to Mr. Horchak last week, I've been in my house currently since 2001, in the house that I own. And I'm not thinking about replacing the actual house, the frame of the house and all of that. The auditorium is beautiful, but in my house, I've had to replace a lot of things that have just over 17 years worn out. Lights and sound in the auditorium is something that's happened. They've worn out. They become obsolete. There are problems with the way the lights are set. We have whole banks of lights that don't work on the stage. When I'm conducting in a concert, the lights are shining in such a way that they place shadows over my face as the conductor, and the students are trying to look at me as I'm conducting them, and all they see is a shadowed face. So there are multiple issues for our musical. The musical is such a professional production. They have over 25 lapel mics, wireless lapel mics. And our sound system right now just is incapable of handling that type of Bluetooth connectivity. We just don't have the equipment. And so because of that, we've had to go out and rent some sound equipment. And that's really for a program as robust and vibrant as Clearview, that is a little bit of a deterrent to the performing for the students. Now they overcome and they adapt, and they have done absolutely marvelous things. But how great would it be if we were able to have those sound lights that would equal the quality of the performers? So that's really where I would love to see that happen with this new equipment. Would be really just the students would benefit incredibly from it. So thank you, John.
John, turn your mic on.
Thank you, Steve. I apologize. Thank you, Jerry and Tom. We do have some questions about these topics. The first question is a good one. The auditorium looks great. Still looks pretty darn good. And still relatively new, as Jerry referenced, 17 years. So why do we need these improvements at this point in time?
Well, John, that's a great question. And in all truthfulness, that is one of the most beautiful auditoriums that you will step into in the state of New Jersey. We hosted a concert band festival last year, and band directors from all over the state just marveled at how beautiful the auditorium is. However, as I was saying before, the beauty of the auditorium is a testimony to how well it's kept. from a custodial and a maintenance perspective. However, some of the nuts and bolts of the auditorium, the things not seen, like the sound and the lights, really are things that need to be upgraded just because they're old. I mean, it's kind of a recurring theme for a lot of the things that have been talked about tonight. We're just looking at equipment that has run the course of time, and and technology is moving forward, as are the years, and we just need to update some of those. And for the greatest benefit of, it will benefit the students. That's really the greatest benefit. But yes, a great question. And that's really why we need to upgrade this. It's just years and maintenance. The things have gotten old.
Okay, thank you. Well, obviously, education, our core mission, is the academic piece. Jerry, I'm sorry to hit you again with another one, but are there any curricular benefits from your vantage point to updating the auditorium systems?
Yeah, well, certainly adding the other component of video within the auditorium, and still that has not been quite figured out exactly what that's going to look like. However, a video component would just add a wonderful multimedia component to the auditorium that currently we don't have. For example, we don't have the ability to project lyrics on screens. We don't have the ability to project art while music is being played or sung. That would be an incredible use of the technology to also increase the amount of students involved. I mean, think about the amount of art students that would be able to project art into that large space that we currently don't have right now. So curricular benefits could be huge.
Thanks, Jerry. And you essentially answered this last question, but I'll just ask you to reiterate one more time. So the third question would be, would Clearview be able to host more regional music events if we made these changes?
Yes, absolutely. Now, are we able to do it now? Sure. But are there limitations because of the sound and lights? Yes. And really, for the beauty of the auditorium, for the space, this 1,000-seat auditorium that really is second to none, especially in Gloucester County, for a school auditorium, not privately owned or run by a company, it really is an incredible use, an incredible space that we could utilize for bringing in colleges to do performances that are trying to do some recruiting, or professional musicians that want to come in and do master classes. Just the opportunities really would be endless just by upgrading sound and lights. And I know that sounds silly, but it really is the truth that would make a huge difference in that already beautiful auditorium.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. That actually looks like the last section in regards to the VPA side. Mr. Guida, Tom, we do have one for you on the STEM side. And you're in the classroom every day, so this should be a softball here. Why can't middle school students do STEM activities in the existing classrooms?
That's a very interesting question. Quick little history about this. I was a former math teacher at Clearview, and then over the last 2 or 3 years, we have introduced a lot of elective courses to our middle school students. And currently, most of the classes that these students choose to take when they take these STEM courses, they're anywhere from 25 to 28 students in a class. And it is we are able to house those students, but a lot of the projects require a lot more space and a lot more equipment. And it is doable at this point, but in the same token, it would be just fantastic if we could get a new, bigger, dedicated room just to these STEM students. On another note, to try to help these students, to help foster their interest in STEM, we do bring them over to the high school once they join the robotics club, and they go to a lab that is similar to this. So this would be even better for these students to be exposed to something along these lines while they're in the middle school, to help with their transition over to the high school.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I know you have kind of a unique perspective, considering that you are a middle school teacher, but you're over dealing with high school students with the robotics program and working in full collaboration with the high school staff. So thank you for that. As we move to the next segment, I just want to, I'm sorry to be redundant, but I can see people popping in at different periods of time on the screen here. So just another reminder on how to submit your questions. Just send a brief question to clearviewvote@clearviewregional.edu. We'll certainly try to get your question answered as the topic is being discussed. And as I mentioned earlier, we're certainly prepared to answer some additional questions at the end of the town hall if your question was not answered during your specific segment. And I want to shift the conversation to improvement for athletics, which is another big part of the students' overall experience at Clearview. Our team for this topic is Facilities Director Steve Nicolella, Athletic Director, and also Director of Student Activities overall, Mike Vicente, and football coach Steve Duncan. Obviously, a very popular topic of interest has been the synthetic turf. So, Mr. Vicente, how would turf impact Clearview Regional? How is it going to be a game changer for us?
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Appreciate this opportunity to have this discussion. Our athletes have to play on turf at many of our opponents' locations. But we unfortunately don't get a chance to practice on it. They really need a consistent place to play and practice to equal that out.
Sorry about that. I'm bouncing in and out with the microphone. Mr. Duncan, how about talk a little bit about your perspective on the turf field? You get your microphone?
There we go. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. Thanks, John. We want to make sure that we're giving every athlete a fair chance, competitive advantage surrounding our high schools. Just make sure that if, just like what Mr. Vicente said, if they're able to play on turf and we have no other place to practice on turf, it does make it a little difficult. And some of the practice facilities, I know on my end as a football coach, we want to try and prevent as much slipping and sliding, especially after it rains or even early morning when the field gets wet from the mist.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nicolella, maybe jump in, talk a little bit about the maintenance, please.
All right, so maintenance of a turf field. Yes, it's a reduced cost on maintaining the turf field. Don't get me wrong, you still have to maintain the turf field, but you don't, with a grass field, you don't have to irrigate it anymore. We don't have to fertilize it. We don't have to seed it. We don't have to cut it upwards of 3 times a week as a maintenance part of it. With turf, and Mike will get into this a little bit later. You can play one game after another. You don't need to have the field rest. Right now we don't allow anybody on our varsity field during the week. That's just to maintain it for our varsity games, our varsity football games.
One of the things that I also wanted to bring up too is having a turf field or turf fields. It would also help reduce the inconvenience of rescheduling games, especially our divisional games. And I can speak to that this year alone. We've had 2 heavy rains that have canceled everything except those games that were on turf. We're afforded the opportunity to participate and use the turf field over at William Wilt. So we were able to keep 2 of our divisional games on for our field hockey team. And also our girls soccer team traveled to Haddonfield and were able to play that game on their turf field. So would absolutely help with limiting rescheduling of games. More and more districts are moving to turf. So again, it would create an equal balance for Clearview to be able to have one. Another factor in this is the NJSIA, the governing body of high school athletics. With field hockey, they do require teams that reach the sectional finals, which we have quite often over the last 5-6 years. But if you make it to the sectional finals, you are required to play on a turf field. So if we do not have a turf field, we have to go out. We have to rent a facility to facilitate that game.
Hey, Mike, thanks, everyone. I just want to interject right here. I think that versatility that was mentioned earlier is very important in terms of we can't all forget how much the weather has changed. We're getting much more intense rain now. Puts a lot of grass fields out of commission for a long period of time because it's not just draining the field, but it's the condition of the field for several days after a heavy rain event. So synthetic turf eliminates that, and it gets the kids out on the field playing as quickly as possible. But one of the big advantages of this project that I wanted to mention is we've gotten the state of New Jersey to commit to paying 40% of the cost of this project, which and I've done many turf fields in my career, and we've submitted many of those as parts of referendum. And this is a recent change in policy at the state that is they've seen things finally after all of our arguments that it's an educational facility to allow those projects to qualify for funding. So great news with the state of New Jersey is paying for 40% of this project. That is not an opportunity that will be available to the district unless this passes within the referendum. So that's a great point I just wanted to bring up. Thank you.
George, if I could just add to that, when we originally were prepared to go out for referendum a few years ago, right prior to COVID hitting, we were actually shut down, as everybody knows, in March of 2020. At that point in time, we were going to have the turf in the referendum for September of 2020. And at that point, we actually received information from the state that we weren't going to get funding. So it is good to see that that was, once it was reintroduced, that it was a benefit to our district and of course to the community as well.
Yeah, we were all very happy about that.
Mike, Mr. Vicente, you want to touch base a little bit about the auxiliary gym?
Sure. The auxiliary gym area would be a great flexible space with room for our wrestling practice. We'd also, we'd be able to roll out the mats, the wrestling mats during the winter season. So that would definitely be a great component for our wrestling program to be able to do that during that time.
Okay, it's just also important to note, obviously the students are not just going to use it after school. It'll be all 9 periods of the day. Many improvements that are made there moving forward. Mr. Duthie, maybe this would be an opportunity to just touch base on the existing weight room and trainers room.
Sure, happy to. So I think what we've realized is the evolution of, I think, these programs that have occurred. And I think some of the thinking was guided a little bit by some of the things that happened during the pandemic as well. But, the room is used for wrestling practice, not for wrestling matches, but wrestling practice. And that certainly is an important component of that room, which we're not going to change. But there is the opportunity, because it's used relatively short period of time for wrestling practice, to increase the functionality and flexibility of that room at the other times of the year, and even during wrestling season as well. So there's plans there. Obviously, we're changing the floor. We're putting a different flooring surface in there. And by the way, this space hasn't been designed yet. We're speaking very preliminarily about what this space might look like, making enhancements to things like destratification fans and improving the lighting and environment and some of the furnishings in the room, and just making things more portable so things can be moved in and out of the room and can be used for different programs at different times of the year, and of course during different times of the school day as well for the entire school community. So it's about more flexibility, more functionality, and letting that space be accessible to more people in the school community.
Okay, thank you, George. Mike, I'm going to ask you to take the first one, if you would, please. The first question that mentions an inquiry about youth programs. Would youth leagues get to use the turf?
Yes, thanks, John. Our high school athletic programs would have the first priority, but time available, we will be able to host special events for our youth programs, which could include their tournaments and their playoffs. So yes.
Okay, thanks, Mike. But you kind of already just covered this, but just to reiterate, because of the confusion that occurred between the March of 2020 proposal and then the 2022 proposal, if you could just reiterate the auxiliary gym issue.
Is that to me, John?
Yes, if you would, George, just to reiterate, I thought it was important. It popped up, and I mean, you kind of covered that when I just threw a prior question out, but I think it would be important to mention that again.
So I think, yeah, when the project was originally conceived, it was a different kind of project with some other reconfigurations within the school and some other possibilities for moving the wrestling practice to another space. But I think it became apparent over time as there's been more participation in the school's athletic program. And in fact, we'll talk a little bit more about this kind of long range athletic facilities plan that the district has going as well. To rethink the previous approach. And so I think we have a very clear idea of what it is that needs to be done in that room right now in terms of making it more flexible, as I said, maintaining the wrestling practice. And then that's going to go along with, I think, the other changes that Mike and the other people have in mind for the other spaces and how they're used as well, which aren't really part of the referendum, but are part of your overall educational program and athletic program too. So we've been a rethinking of things. I think the pandemic maybe had something to do with it in terms of the time things kind of sat, and we're looked at a little more thoroughly, or maybe with a different set of eyes after everything we went through with the pandemic and people being at home and everybody happy to get back. So anyway, I see there's a question here about the turf field.
I just want to make a generic statement, and I'd ask Esther and George to correct me if this is not accurate, but more than one time tonight, we mentioned the phrase, it's not designed yet. And if you could just touch base on the typical timeline between pre-referendum, referendum, and post-referendum, when design actually occurs during that period.
Great question. So yeah, the pre-referendum period of time, which is obviously now, and the submissions that are made to the state, at a very, very, I don't want to say primitive, but a very preliminary level. And they show basically, they illustrate the concept. They're, we call them schematic drawings, but they're even pre-schematic. They're not even developed to a level of detail. The idea is to get the program, as it's known at that time, into a document that's called an educational specification, and then have that document reflected on a drawing based on what is known at the time. You have to remember this project was submitted initially to the state back in 2020 or late 2019. So things have changed since then. Now, after the referendum passes, that's when we really get to work on the detailed design of the spaces. That's when we move forward with the final, what we call design development documents, which are the documents that really hone in on the design. We get all the stakeholders' inputs. We start making critical decisions about equipment and spatial layouts and programs and equipment and many, many other factors that affect the design. And we develop that design, just like it says, design development. And it's only after that project is completed, after that process is completed and consensus is built, that we move on to putting pencil to paper, so to speak, and doing the construction documents, which will be the actual documents that the contractors will bid on at the conclusion of the process. That's a 6-month process or so, just to get to the point where we finish that design development and we finish those construction documents for the spaces as well, for the renovation work, because a lot of other things go into that as well, as you can imagine.
All right, thank you, George. I just wanted that to be clear for the public. Just because of the questions that have come in over the last few weeks, asking for specific detail, and the reality that detail has yet to be developed for the reasons that you just specifically stated. We do have a question on the turf field, question and statement actually, that I think is important to address as well. George, I want to ask you to pick up on this one, and I'm certainly happy to add in if needed. But the statement is a turf field would be a great addition for Clearview. In fact, I am wondering why a second turf field isn't part of the plan. Will one field be enough for all teams?
Well, I think that remains to be seen, John. I think that in other school districts with a first turf field, they have in fact found that they would want additional fields to be installed. And I think that here in Clearview, with the competing needs of other projects as well, to keep the proposal, the tax proposal, tax neutral, and to also be able to do the other projects that are also of priority, we can fit one turf field into the referendum at this time. As you know, there is a long range athletic facility plan in place, which includes the possibility of installing additional synthetic turf fields or field and other facilities as well to upgrade all of the athletic facilities throughout Clearview as part of that plan. So I think this first step, within the referendum with that contribution, from the state, I think it's a great way to start off, and seeing how it goes, and then maybe moving forward with that plan as as time goes by.
Yes, thanks, George. I just thought it was an important question to touch base. We do certainly understand the importance of both being able to practice and play on the field, as opposed to just having game day be on the fields. Obviously, various sports play at a different speed. I know, for example, field hockey obviously is a substantially different game on synthetic turf than it is on natural turf, and I'm sure other sports are equally different. So it is something that we desire to do. I think it was well said, George, that this is a step in the right direction. It's a first phase. We do have multiple year plans for athletics, and we would most likely be required to do that through our capital reserve, maintenance reserve funding. Okay. So if you would like some additional information, actually, I do not see any other questions, so we can just move over to that next segment. So if you'd like some additional information on any of the topics that are being discussed, you can go straight to our website, clearviewregional.edu/future. The website has many of the answers to the frequently asked questions, as well as an informational video and details about voting. And please continue to follow us on social media for updates about the referendum. Lastly, but certainly not least, is the segment on funding. Fortunately, there's some good news on this topic. A lot of planning went into the designing a proposal that would not increase the current tax rate. We're fortunate tonight to have a few experts with us to explain the details. You'll hear from our school business administrator, Esther Pennell, our financial advisor, Sherry Tracy of Phoenix Advisors, and bond counsel, Tony Salamini of Wellens, Goldman, and Spitzer. And I would like to start with our financial advisor, Sherry.
Thank you. So when a district holds a bond referendum, you're asking to borrow money and sell bonds in order to raise those funds. So when you have a project such as Clearview does, $59 million of projects, obviously that can't be funded through the capital budget. So the district goes out, asks the voters to approve a referendum, and then those funds are raised through the sale of bonds. Investors purchase those bonds and they're repaid over time with taxes. The state also contributes when this happens, when you do have an approved capital project through a referendum, the state contributes towards debt service, both principal and interest towards those payments. Clearview has two really important things going for it in this case, and I think it's been mentioned a couple of times as we talked about the timing of this. Because we're looking at $59 million of total upgrades, because of debt that's being paid off, actually from a 2003 referendum, is being paid off this year, the school district can go out and issue new debt that essentially replaces that debt. So that debt was borrowed in 2003 for a 20-year term. That debt's going to be paid off, and that is how we're able to issue the $59 million of total improvements without an increase in the tax rate for debt service. The debt service aid is another big component, as we spoke about. Virtually all of the projects that were submitted were approved for debt service aid. That does not always happen, and as George mentioned, It's extremely rare. I've never seen it for turf either. So the fact that Clearview is really maximizing the amount of debt service aid that's coming from the state for these projects. Debt service aid is only available when you issue debt. So if these projects, even if these projects were chipped away slowly over time through the budget, residents in the district would be paying 100% for those projects instead of essentially 60%. One other thing to note too is we've talked a couple times about the debt service aid, or the debt service aid as being 23 million. It is 23 million, but it's also the interest on that 23 million. So debt service from the state, debt service aid is for principal and interest. So when we go out to issue the bonds, you're getting the repayment is on the percentages, roughly 40% of the total principal and interest. So the dollars actually end up being much more than 23 million. So that's an important component too. Roughly, taxpayers are paying about 60% and the state about 40%.
Thank you, Sherry. Mrs. Pennell, maybe you can jump in here.
Sure. Thank you. So the district plans to use its capital reserve funds to bridge the gap between state aid and the local share to make sure that the debt service tax rate remains unchanged. The district's been saving funds over time in its capital reserve savings account to use towards these capital improvements. We've been discussing how best to use these reserve funds. Since all of our projects are eligible for state aid, as Sherry mentioned, we decided to apply a portion of the capital reserve savings towards the repayment of the new bonds. This would ensure the district captures the maximum amount of state aid on the front end. The reserve funds would then supplement the state aid the district would receive following the voter approval of the bond referendum to ensure that the debt service tax rate remains stable throughout the life of the bonds. Without a referendum, we would not be eligible for any of the state aid funding for these projects, and funding would need to come from our annual operating budget. This, however, is not really feasible in our school's tight maintenance budget. The annual maintenance budget this year is 1.3 million, and that includes the salaries of our maintenance staff. We have a hard cap on that budget too. We're allowed to increase the operating budget tax levy by 2% each year. Even with the use of our reserve funds, which we have saved for these projects, we still would not have enough funds to complete these projects inside the regular budget. In general, we include maintenance type projects in the annual operating budget, but capital projects simply will not fit. We do explore every possible funding source available to maintain and upgrade our buildings. Our most recent security improvements that we spoke about earlier, the lockdown emergency notification system and the 3M window film, they were funded through grants, not the operating budget. And Mr. Duthie talked about a 2019-2020 HVAC control work project that we did in the high school, the pilot project. We did that using maintenance reserve funds, which is another one of our savings accounts. It's not done through the operating budget. So bond funding plays a critical role in the district's ongoing maintenance and replacement plan. And that strategy includes packaging some of our needs as a referendum to get the significant state aid that comes with it. This proposal considers long-term needs that would not fit well into the annual operating budget, but would qualify for that state aid. So what happens if the referendum is approved and we go ahead and do the projects and there's money left over? These monies left over from the projects must be used to reduce the outstanding principal amount of the school bonds of the associated project. We're not allowed to use them for other things in the district. And we have history of this. We demonstrated this with both our 2009 and our 2016 bonds that we issued. In 2009, we issued $1.3 million worth of bonds for the solar system on the middle school. When the project was done, we had $154,497 left over. Well, we brought $75,000 of that into the 12-13 budget and another $79,497 in the 2013-14 budget. Same thing happened with the 2016 bonds. Of the 1.995 million issued, there was 220,839 that was unexpended. We utilized $75,000 in the 21-22 debt service budget to reduce the tax levy for the principal of those bonds. And we actually utilized the remaining 145,839 in this year's 22-23 debt service budget to offset the principal on the bonds.
Thank you, Esther. I think that's a really important point. Mr. Solomon, I'm sorry to wake up there.
Great. Great. Good evening, everyone. Tony Solomini from Wilentz, Goldman, and Spitzer. Our job as the bond attorney is to provide legal advice and to make sure that the board is complying with all applicable statutes and regulations. But from a financing perspective, it's really impressive, and Ms. Pennell should get a ton of credit. And this should be actually a class for business administrators of how to appropriately budget by saving funds in the capital reserve account, how to maximize the project by utilizing a program such as an ESIP, by maximizing debt service aid for projects when your debt is falling off so that there's no tax increase to the voters. So it's combining several different financing strategies, and it's taken years of planning. And I hope that really comes through for all the hard work that Esther and your financial advisor, Sherry, have done to put you in this kind of position to be able to do this amount of projects for no new tax increase to the taxpayers. And I think it's, very important to reiterate that currently the only funding available is if you issue bonds through a voter-approved referendum. So if this referendum were not to pass, or the improvements were to be funded in another avenue, that $23 million that Sherry spoke about earlier, the district would be entitled to none of it. But your needs don't go away. So then it would be up to Ms. Pennell, and the rest of your administration to try to figure out how to fund those projects without the aid. I think it's important to note, I don't know if anybody's been following the newspaper, but October 6th, there was several $100 million worth of projects approved via referendum in the state of New Jersey. And us as New Jersey taxpayers, those projects all have different amounts of eligibility for aid. Us as taxpayers all contribute to that aid for other school districts. So now it's your opportunity as a resident of the Clearview Regional School District to get some of that aid to come back to your school district because you're paying for aid for other school districts. I know there's concern out there, and people watch the news, and they watch whatever financial either radio show or newscast that they listen to. Inflation is up, bond rates are up, etc. Bond rates are still at historic averages. So it's still, I think your financial advisor would still say that it's still a good time to borrow money. And I think for a way to think about it from a really positive perspective is, as a public entity, since you're getting up to 40% of that paid for, 40% of the increase in interest cost is also paid for by the state. So even if interest rates are up a little bit from where they were last year, 40% of that increase is covered by, up to 40% of that increase is covered by the state aid anyway. So you're not experiencing the full increase in interest rates. When Sherry prepared the tax impact analysis, they do a good job of being as conservative as possible. So this way it puts you in the best position for success once the referendum is passed and we go to sell the bonds. And the sale of the bonds is just like all the other public projects that a school district does. The bonds have to be sold via a competitive process, and we have to award that to the lowest interest rate. So it's a fair process, and that process will be done with the best interest of the taxpayers of the school district in mind. And we're obviously open to any questions that you may have, so I'll turn it back to John at this time.
Okay, thank you. We do have some questions regarding the financial details of the referendum. Some of these appear to have been answered throughout the discussion, but they're on the list here. I would like to go back through those. The first one is about timing. And the question is, shouldn't we wait instead of doing a bond referendum when there's, I guess, less inflation? Sherry, maybe you can take this one.
Sure. And you're right. Tony did touch on this a little bit. Interest rates, as we see, every time you open I was going to say the newspaper, but I don't know if anybody opens a newspaper, but you turn on the TV or look at your phone, news stories, you hear about rates are up, interest rates are up, borrowing rates are up, mortgage rates are up. The bond rates there's still a pretty strong demand for highly rated municipal tax exempt debt, which is what school districts like Clearview are able to issue. And because of that, the rates have still remained low. So for the borrowing rates, 20-year bond rates. So as we're looking at, they've still remained low. So we're still in a very favorable interest rate for borrowing. We had a district that sold bonds today for 20 years that was under 4%. And but one of the good things, actually, another good thing that Clearview has going for it with the timing is that investment rates now are what's higher. So in the past, the short-term rates, the 6-month, 1-year, 2-year treasury rates have all been very low. For the last several years, they've all been under 1%. So you haven't been able to really earn a lot of money that you have sitting around in the bank in any kind of investment. And that goes for schools. Schools have to invest, they're required to invest in very conservative, principal preserving investments like US Treasuries. So you haven't been able to earn very much. But now those rates are higher. Those rates are close to 4% as well. So you're basically, while the project's getting built and all of the different phases are happening throughout the project, the district is actually able to earn pretty close to probably what the borrowing rate will be on that money. And those interest earnings can be applied directly to pay debt service, so that you go directly towards paying the interest costs for debt service. So it's actually a very favorable time in the market right now to be issuing bonds.
Thank you, Sherry. That's some of that good information, somewhat a counter to what we're hearing or what we would think would be logical, but you make some great points to balance out the increasing environment that we're living in right now. Tony, I'll ask you to take this one. What happens if, and again, some of this was already covered, but I do want to make sure just to reiterate, what happens if project costs are higher than estimates?
Great. That's always a concern. And, when us as individuals do projects in our house, we're always, we always design a project and then it, always comes in higher than we expect. For a public project, that's not allowed to happen. The Board of Education is not allowed to spend $1 more than is authorized by the voters. It's actually a criminal offense, so it definitely will not occur. And safeguards are put into that. When Mr. Duthie designed your project, he included escalation in those estimates. He includes a project contingency in that estimate as well, to make sure, because he knows he's designing the projects, he's basing his estimates on these preliminary schematics. And as he spoke about, he hasn't prepared the final designs yet, which will go out to bid, several months after the successful referendum. So Mr. Duthie wants to make sure that we can have all these projects. And also, when he puts out bid specifications, he'll put out alternates in those bid specifications as well to give some flexibility to the projects as well. So the projects can't come in over budget. Your architect, who's a very good school architect, I'm sure has taken all the conservative measures possible to make sure that it doesn't happen. And if some projects, because, supply chain, et cetera, come in higher, other projects may come in lower to balance it out. And also, if we have to, Mr. Duthie will bid with alternatives to slightly change the scope of the project while keeping the general tenor of the project the same.
Thank you, Tony.
Great. Thanks, John.
I'm going to try to jump in on this next question. Mrs. Pennell, I'll ask you to back me up if I missed anything on this one. It says, what would we get back in taxes if we don't do a referendum? Very good question. It's actually one of our more popular questions in the FAQs. It's actually listed on our website, but I want to walk through it with you and also provide some context. So if voters do not approve the current referendum, The old school debt payments, as we've mentioned tonight a few times, will end without a new investment taking its place. So then in the short term, what will happen is the average Harrison Township homeowner will have an extra $27 per month, and Mantua Township property owners would recoup less than $16 per month. Now, why the difference between the two communities? Well, those numbers are based on the average assessed Harrison house of $343 and change, and the average assessed Mantua house at $208,000 and change. To make more of kind of a more equal comparison, to break it down, the monthly decrease, and I'll do this on a per 100,000 basis, just obviously it's an easy multiplier for whatever the value of your home. So based upon 100,000 of assessed value, Harrison would decrease $785 and Mantua $7.62. Both of those would be on a per month basis. However, now this is the context that I think is important. Those small savings amounts would likely be very short-lived because we're still going to need to do the majority of these projects, such as roofing and HVAC. So without a referendum, the state aid that comes with it, the district would have to cover those costs at 100%. And that would typically come from our operating budget, which is completely paid with tax dollars through our local taxes. So a referendum really is a long-range improvement tool or plan that allows the district to complete substantial projects, but then to cover that cost over 20 years, much like we would as homeowners cover our mortgage or a home equity loan. Esther, anything to add to that, or?
No, you did a great job.
Okay, thank you. We're almost we're actually right on target here. I'm glad this balanced out. We reserved a little time for additional questions, so if you have them, please email any questions again to clearviewvote@clearviewregional.edu, and we'll just give it a minute or two. And as we're waiting for those questions, Mrs. Pennell, if we could start with you with this one. It's a very, very good question and very popular issue over the last 2 years. All districts received federal COVID funds. What are Clearview's funds being used for, and can they be used for these projects?
Sure, John, those federal funds are targeted for specific uses. Clearview used them for the summer learning and enrichment programs last summer. They're also being used, they were used this year to replace the 7th grader and the 10th grader Chromebooks that are issued to each student. They're used for staff professional development, transportation contracts, character education, and student services related to social emotional learning and mental health. There are more details on the district website at clearviewregional.edu. If anyone's interested, they can see it there.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Pennell. And I will say, thankfully, schools throughout our state received a substantial amount of aid for those COVID funds. Candidly, without that, our transportation department would be in a really difficult position. I know we've allocated a lot of money to transportation as these costs have continued to go up. Hopefully that'll stabilize as we move forward. One of the things we talked a lot about, we continue to talk a lot about, an interest from our community, obviously, is this proposal for turf. Here's another question that is turf related. Mr. Vicente, I would ask you to jump in here. Would the turf be used for more than football?
Yes, John. The turf would be permanently lined for football, field hockey, both lacrosse, both boys and girls lacrosse, and possibly for soccer. The turf is a tougher surface than grass, so it can definitely handle more use. Also, please keep in mind that if we want to use grass for these sports, the fields need to be restriped, relined very frequently throughout the year.
Okay, thank you, Mr. V. Here's another question, and I'm happy to try to answer this one. What's in it for the community members who do not have children in our schools? Very good question. Clearview obviously continuously maintains and improves our schools. We've heard a lot about that tonight from various people on the panel talking about our investments over the years. And we believe that that's an important component to a quality school and genuinely a benefit to living in either Mantua or Harrison Township. We want to use this opportunity for substantial state aid. And again, I don't mean to be redundant, but I think it's an important part of this answer to the question. Because again, without this referendum, we will, as taxpayers, be absorbing 100% of the cost for anything that the district implements. And communities directly benefit from attending events at upgraded facilities, whether it be athletic or, as you heard Mr. Deloach earlier, the various choir and concerts that we have throughout the year, and even our musical and our play. So there is an absolute benefit for any community. I know there's research out there about the correlation between the value of a school and the value of the residential houses actually in that community. So there is a cause and effect relationship there. So I think that that's important to note. So we have another question about the projects, specifically how we would prioritize projects if the referendum does not pass. Mrs. Pennell, could you pick up on this question, please?
Sure. It's a very good question. I mean, at this point, all of the projects are a priority. Many of the projects we've talked about tonight are because of the systems, they're failing. They're beyond their useful lives. We're putting Band-Aids, if you will, on the systems right now. The roofing, the security upgrades, the generators, I mean, how do you make a decision there as to which one's the most important? The board and the committees would need to go back to the drawing board, probably have to make some difficult decisions to afford the necessities. Of course, we could not cover all the expenses out of our operating budget without the $23 million in state aid that would come with an approved referendum.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Pennell. There would be some very difficult decisions to make. I'm trying to see if we have any additional questions coming in. We're actually doing pretty well with time. I do not see any other questions. So if you do have other questions, tonight is not your only opportunity. Obviously, there will be, we'll be continuing to answer phone calls, emails, whatever the case may be, all the way up through November 8th. If we don't get your question tonight, we will certainly email a reply. Again, I feel like I've said this 4 or 5 times tonight, but it's important. Please remember to check the frequently asked questions on the website at clearviewregional.edu/future. That website does have a substantial amount of detail and answers many of the most frequently asked questions. So in regards to voting, there are more options than ever to make your voice heard. If you want to apply for a vote by mail ballot, you'll have to do it very quickly, as soon as possible. In New Jersey, there's obviously another option, and that's called early voting, and that takes place from October 29th through November 6th. But only at a few locations across the county. So it's important to know where those locations are. Regular polling places are open on Tuesday, November 8th. And again, you can find all that information and much more on our website. So not seeing any additional questions, I guess we can move to close this evening. I genuinely appreciate the community members who took the time to join us tonight. I ask you to stay engaged, help us get the word out about the referendum, and continue to ask your questions so that we can enable you and empower you to make an informed decision on November 8th. This is obviously a very important time in our district's history and overall community. So thank you for taking the time to learn about the referendum tonight. To all the panelists who were here tonight, thank you very much. We genuinely appreciate your expertise and perspective. I hope and I believe that your insights tonight provided an additional understanding to all of us. I know that I actually learned one or two things this evening as well, and I thought I had this referendum down pat, so I was glad to participate. I will ask everybody to continue learning about the referendum on our website and through our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts. And last but not least, remember, your opinion only counts if you vote. So thank you again for participating. I hope you have a great night. I guess that's appropriate to end with, go Phils. Take care. Thank you.